the night was colder than usual in the valley of Pine Ridge. A silence hung thick over the forest, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the low hum of wind slicing through the trees. It had been 7 years since the world changed, since the outbreak spread like wildfire and civilization collapsed beneath the weight of the undead. Survivors clung to pockets of hope, building safe zones, trading with each other, and keeping as far from the roaming infected as possible. But something was different now. At the edge of the northern woods, a small survivor camp known as Outpost Ember clung to life. Its leader, a grizzled former radio technician named Cole Matthews, was obsessed with one thing: signals. Every night, without fail, Cole would sit in his cramped communications hut, headphones on, scanning dead frequencies. Most nights brought nothing but static, sometimes eerie echoes. But this night was different. Just after midnight, a sound broke through the static. "Anyone alive? Mountains, safe, we have a plan, join us." Cole sat up straight, yanking the headphones from his ears. He frantically scribbled down what he could decipher. The voice was faint, fragmented, but unmistakably human. He tuned the dial carefully, trying to catch it again. Then, once more. "Bring weapons, not infected, signal. Mountain Pass, 3 nights." The message looped 3 times and cut to static. Cole's heart pounded. A signal meant hope. A signal meant others. But more importantly, it meant someone was organizing. After years of disjointed survival, was there finally a resistance strong enough to fight back? By dawn, Cole called for a meeting in the town hall, a reinforced barn now serving as the hub of Outpost Ember. The camp's dozen core members gathered: Rhea, a young but fearless scout; Jax, a former soldier and strategist; Tilda, the camp medic, and several others who had lived through too much loss to trust easily. He replayed the signal using an old speaker rigged to solar panels. The static-filled voice echoed through the room. When it ended, silence filled the space once more, followed by immediate tension. "It's probably a trap," Tilda said, arms crossed. "Or a glitch from years ago," Jax added. "We've been burned before." "But what if it's real?" Rhea challenged. "You heard it, we have a plan. What if someone's finally standing up to them?" That sparked murmurs around the room. The thought of a real, coordinated resistance struck a nerve. Cole leaned forward. "We can't ignore this. I say we send a team. Just a scout mission to verify. We can't sit behind fences forever." Debate followed, but eventually, the group agreed. A team of 3 would set out by nightfall: Rhea, Jax, and a tracker named Silas, who rarely spoke but knew the mountains better than anyone. They'd head toward Mountain Pass, a route once used for transporting timber, now mostly forgotten. If the signal was real, that was the place to find answers. As the trio prepared, whispers spread across the camp. Hope was a dangerous thing, yet it was also the one thing stronger than fear. That evening, as the sun dipped below the treetops, casting long shadows over the forest, Rhea tightened her backpack straps and checked her weapons. Jax was already at the gate, scanning the woods with silent focus. Silas stood apart, listening to the wind, head tilted like he could hear something the others couldn't. Before they left, Cole handed them a battered handheld radio. "I'll be listening," he said. "Every hour, on the hour." Rhea nodded. "If it's real, we'll bring the news back." They vanished into the woods, heading toward the unknown. Hours passed. Then midnight came again. In his hut, Cole sat, headphones on, listening. Suddenly, another signal. But this time, the voice was different. "Don't come, they're already here." Then screams. Then silence. Cole's blood ran cold. Part 2 will continue with the team deep in the forest, finding clues about the source of the signal, and facing the first signs that something has gone terribly wrong. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 now? The forest was thick, cloaked in shadows. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying with the gentle breeze. Rhea, Jax, and Silas moved cautiously through the undergrowth, their boots barely making a sound. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of the unknown pressed down on them. The signal had drawn them out into the night, but with every passing hour, the atmosphere grew more oppressive, as if the forest itself was hiding something. "We should be getting close," Rhea whispered, her voice barely audible. She glanced at Jax, whose face was set in a grim expression. He had been quiet ever since they left the outpost, as if he could sense something they couldn't yet see. Silas, walking a few paces ahead, stopped abruptly. He raised a hand, signaling them to halt. The others followed suit, crouching low. Silas's eyes scanned the area, his senses sharp. He didn't need words to communicate, his posture spoke volumes. "I don't like this," Jax muttered, gripping his rifle tightly. "Too quiet." Rhea nodded. "Something feels off." They waited in the stillness, the only sound the rustling of the wind and the occasional creak of distant trees. Then, without warning, Silas motioned them forward. He had spotted something. A few hundred yards ahead, the faint glow of firelight flickered through the trees. The group moved cautiously toward it, staying low and alert. As they neared the source, they saw a small clearing ahead, just big enough for a campfire, a few tents, and the scattered remnants of what had once been a functioning outpost. But what caught their attention wasn't the camp itself, it was the bodies. Scattered around the fire were the remains of several people, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some had been torn apart, others were burned, their clothes singed from what looked like a struggle. The stench of decay mixed with the acrid scent of smoke and burnt flesh. It was clear that whatever had happened here, it had not been a simple raid. Rhea moved closer to the nearest body, her eyes scanning for any signs of life. She reached out, touching the wrist of the fallen figure. It was cold. Dead. "I don't understand," Silas murmured, his voice strained. "The signal, it sounded like they were alive." Jack shook his head, looking around the camp with growing suspicion. This wasn't some random attack. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Rhea stood up, her face grim. They were warned. Someone wanted them to leave. She scanned the clearing again. But who, and why? Before they could discuss further, the radio clipped to Rhea's belt crackled to life. The static was thick, but they could hear a faint, distorted voice. "They're coming, don't run." It was the same voice from the earlier signal. But now it was desperate. Frantic. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Whoever had sent the message was still out there, and they were in danger. But the real question was, who, or what, was hunting them? Rhea's heart raced. "We need to get back to the outpost. Now." Silas, ever the tracker, scanned the ground. He crouched down, studying the disturbed earth around the camp. "There's something here, something recent." Jax's eyes widened. "We're not alone." The hairs on the back of Rhea's neck stood up. She turned to look back toward the darkened woods. The oppressive silence had returned, but now there was something beneath it, a sense of being watched. Without another word, they began to retreat, moving swiftly but carefully through the trees. Every rustle, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the quiet night. The weight of their surroundings bore down on them, and the feeling of being pursued grew stronger. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a low growl, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet on the forest floor. Rhea's breath hitched. "We're not alone," she whispered. Jax raised his rifle, scanning the darkness. "Keep moving," he ordered. "And stay close." They broke into a run, weaving through the trees, their hearts pounding in their chests. The growling grew louder, closer. And then, from the shadows, they saw movement. A figure emerged from the darkness, pale, gaunt, and moving with unnatural speed. Another figure followed, then another. They were zombies. But these were different. Their movements were deliberate, coordinated, as if they were hunting. Rhea's mind raced. "They're evolving," she breathed. The signal, it was a trap. Jax's face hardened. "We need to get back to the outpost. Fast." As they ran, the figures in the darkness closed in, and the hunt began. The forest, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and every step Rhea took seemed to echo in the silence, as if the woods themselves were waiting. The undead pursuing them were faster than anything they had encountered before, and their low growls echoed through the trees, sending chills down their spines. The hunt had begun. Rhea pushed forward, her legs burning from the sprint, but she dared not stop. The others were close behind, their faces grim and set. Silas led the way, weaving through the trees with an uncanny skill, while Jax guarded their rear, eyes flicking back and forth, watching for any sign of movement. Rhea could feel the weight of her pack pressing down on her, but it was nothing compared to the terror gnawing at her insides. These weren't just zombies, they were something more. More intelligent, more coordinated. There was no doubt in her mind now, this wasn't a random encounter. Someone, or something, had set this trap. A rustling sound came from behind them, and Rhea whipped around just in time to see the first of the undead emerging from the trees. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, its eyes hollow and bloodshot. But there was something unsettlingly different about it. It wasn't stumbling mindlessly like the others, they were running, chasing with purpose. They were hunting. "Keep moving!" Jack shouted, his voice sharp as he raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest, but the zombie didn't fall. It staggered for a moment, then righted itself and continued its pursuit with terrifying speed. Rhea felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. These creatures weren't like the usual slow-moving zombies they had encountered. They were adapting, evolving. And that meant they were far more dangerous. "We need to split up," Rhea yelled, her voice strained. "They can't track all of us if we spread out." "No time." Jack shot back, his eyes narrowing as another zombie appeared to their right. It lunged, but Jax was quicker, firing again. The bullet struck the creature's head, sending it crashing to the ground, but Rhea knew it was only a temporary solution. There were more coming. "Silas, where's the trail?" Rhea called, her voice desperate. "We need to get back to the outpost, now." Silas didn't answer immediately. He was focused on the path ahead, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the route that would lead them to safety. His hand shot out to point toward a narrow gap between two thick trees. "This way," he said, his voice low but urgent. Without hesitation, the trio veered toward the gap, weaving through the dense undergrowth. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. The growls and screeches of the undead filled the air, echoing off the trees and pressing in on them from all sides. Then, a flash of movement. Silas was the first to react, grabbing Rhea by the arm and yanking her to the side. The others followed suit, just in time to avoid a large, rotting branch that swung out from the darkness, barely missing them. It was a trap. Someone, or something, was trying to corral them. "Damn it!" Jax hissed, slamming his fist into the dirt. "This is no accident." Rhea's heart pounded as she realized the truth. They weren't just running from zombies, they were being hunted by something far more intelligent. And if they didn't get back to Outpost Ember soon, they might not make it out of the forest alive. They pushed forward, the air thick with tension. The mountain pass was within reach, but the sense of urgency was growing. The zombies were closing in, and with each passing moment, their numbers seemed to multiply. "Jax!" Rhea shouted. "We need a plan." Jax's eyes darted around as he thought quickly. "We can't outrun them forever," he said, his mind racing. "We need to find higher ground. We'll have a better chance of fighting them off if we have the high ground." Silas nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the trees. "There's a ridge up ahead. If we can make it there, we'll have the advantage." Without wasting another second, they changed direction, heading for the ridge. The climb was steep, and the trees thinned out the higher they went. The air grew colder, thinner, but Rhea didn't care. Every step was a battle against the rising panic in her chest. She had to believe they could make it. As they neared the top, Rhea felt a strange sense of dread settle over her. The forest around them had fallen eerily silent, and even the undead seemed to be holding back. For a brief moment, everything was still. And then, they saw it. At the top of the ridge, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, a figure stood. Its outline was human, but something was off. It didn't move like a person. It didn't even seem to breathe. The figure turned, and Rhea's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a human. It was something far worse. The figure stood motionless, watching them with a cold, unnerving stillness. Rhea's heart skipped a beat, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The shadows seemed to cling to the figure, bending and twisting around its form like a cloak. It wasn't quite human. And it wasn't quite undead. But the way it moved, or rather, the way it didn't move, sent a chill crawling down Rhea's spine. Jax was the first to react. He raised his rifle, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. It simply stared at them, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. The faintest hint of a smile played across its lips, though it didn't seem like a smile born of joy. It was something darker. Something more calculating. Rhea's mind raced. She had read about these kinds of beings, the ones caught between life and death. Some legends spoke of creatures that could control the dead, or those who were cursed to roam the earth, neither alive nor truly undead. Was this one of those things? Was it human at one point, only to be transformed into something worse? "I don't like this," Silas muttered, his voice low and tense. He stepped back, positioning himself between the figure and the others, his rifle raised. "We need to keep moving." But before they could turn to leave, the figure spoke, its voice a low, melodic whisper that seemed to reverberate through the air. "You should have stayed away." Rhea's pulse quickened. There was no mistaking the venom in the words. It knew they had been following the signal. It knew they had come for answers. And now, it was making it clear they were no longer welcome in this part of the mountains. "Who are you?" Rhea demanded again, her voice much less steady than she would have liked. "What is this place?" The figure tilted its head, almost as if it were considering her question. Its lips parted slightly, revealing sharp, unnaturally white teeth. "I am what remains," it said cryptically. "I was called, as you were. But I am not your ally." The wind howled through the trees, and for a moment, the figure seemed to vanish into the shadows, its form blending with the night. The air grew heavier, as if something in the atmosphere had shifted. Rhea felt her breath catch in her throat. Before they could react, the figure reappeared, its body shifting like smoke through the darkness. It moved faster than anything human could, its unnatural speed a blur. Jax raised his rifle to fire, but the figure was already on him. It was like trying to hit a shadow. "Move!" Rhea shouted, grabbing Silas's arm and pulling him toward the ridge's edge. They had to escape. There was no time to fight this thing, not without knowing what it truly was. The figure didn't chase them immediately. Instead, it seemed to melt into the trees, its glowing eyes watching from the distance, unblinking, cold. Rhea didn't dare look back. They had to move. They had to get to the outpost. But the unease in her gut told her they weren't safe, not yet. They reached the top of the ridge, breathing hard, the exhaustion from the climb weighing on them. The mountain's edge dropped sharply into a deep ravine. The terrain was treacherous, and Rhea knew they couldn't risk going any further. Jax cursed under his breath, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. What was that thing? It wasn't undead. But it wasn't human either. "I don't know," Silas replied, his voice edged with disbelief. "But whatever it is, it's not alone. We need to stay alert." Rhea nodded, her eyes darting around. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The figure was still out there, waiting. Then, something in the distance caught her attention, a flicker of light far below in the valley. It was faint but unmistakable. A beacon. "That's it," Rhea said, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and fear. "The outpost. We're almost there." "Then let's go," Jax said, his tone grim. "And keep your eyes peeled." that thing wasn't the only danger out here. As they began descending the ridge, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble ever so slightly. It wasn't an earthquake, it was something else. The ground shifted again, and the noise was unmistakable, a low, guttural growl. Rhea's stomach dropped. They had no more time to waste. Out of the shadows, more of them emerged, the evolved zombies, faster and smarter than before. This time, they weren't alone. A dozen or more had gathered, and they were all closing in on the group. But it wasn't just the undead they had to worry about now. The figure from the ridge stood at the forefront, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It was leading them. And it wasn't about to let them escape. "We can't outrun them," Rhea said through clenched teeth. "We fight." Jax nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We fight, and we survive." The last battle had begun. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The first zombie lunged from the shadows, its mouth open wide in a silent scream. Rhea didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle, taking aim, and fired. The shot struck the creature in the chest, sending it crashing to the ground. But there was no time to savor the moment. More were coming, pouring from the woods like a flood of relentless, rotting flesh. Silas and Jax were already engaged, their weapons flashing in the darkness. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountain pass, but it wasn't enough to slow the oncoming horde. They had to get to the outpost, there was no choice now. But the undead weren't their only problem. The figure from the ridge was moving closer, its glowing eyes now fixed on them with malicious intent. It walked with a deliberate slowness, but each step seemed to resonate with an unnatural power. It wasn't in a hurry. It didn't need to be. The zombies were the distraction. "Jax, we can't let it get any closer," Rhea shouted, her voice strained with fear. She fired another round, hitting a zombie in the head, but it did little to stem the tide. "We need to push through." Jax nodded, his face grim as he unleashed another barrage of fire. "We can't let it control the situation. We fight, and we make it to the outpost, no matter what." But Rhea could see the doubt in his eyes. There was something more to this. The way the figure moved, the way it seemed to control the undead, it was more than they could handle with guns alone. The ground beneath them trembled again, and Rhea's heart sank. From the trees, more of the undead emerged, but these weren't just mindless creatures. They were different, more coordinated, moving in sync with each other. It was like they were being commanded. "Fall back!" Silas shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "We're being herded." The realization hit Rhea like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just a random encounter. Someone, or something, was orchestrating the chaos. They were being led into a trap, and the figure from the ridge was the mastermind. But there was no time to think. They had no choice but to keep fighting, to keep moving forward. Rhea could hear the sound of the undead getting closer, their guttural growls rising in volume. There was no safe place. They were surrounded. "On my count, we break left," Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise of the approaching horde. "Silas, cover us." Rhea nodded, gripping her rifle tighter. She knew the plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. As Jax began his countdown, she focused on the figure standing in the distance. Its gaze never wavered. It knew exactly what they were doing. 3, 2, 1, go! In a split second, they turned and sprinted left, hoping to break free from the encircling undead. The crunch of footsteps in the dry leaves beneath their feet mingled with the sound of gunfire as Silas fired behind them, picking off zombies as they approached. Rhea could feel the weight of her pack slowing her down, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep going. She had to make it. But then, without warning, the figure moved. It didn't run. It simply was there, stepping into their path, blocking their way. It had anticipated their every move. "You really think you can escape?" The voice came from behind them, impossibly close. Rhea's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face the figure. Its lips curled into a twisted smile. "You're part of the game now." And there's no way out. Rhea's stomach churned. They had been bait. And the trap was now fully sprung. Silas aimed his rifle, his finger twitching on the trigger. "We'll make our way through you," he snarled. "You're not stopping us." The figure didn't flinch. "You don't understand. This is beyond you. Beyond your kind." Before Rhea could react, the ground beneath them cracked open with a loud, ominous noise. Zombies began to pour from the earth itself, emerging from the cracks like a swarm of locusts. The undead were everywhere, too many to count. They were surrounded. "Keep moving!" Jack shouted, his voice desperate. "We can't stop now. We need to get to the outpost." But Rhea knew the truth. There was no escaping this. No easy way out. The zombies weren't the only threat now. The figure, the one who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, was closing in on them. It moved with a deliberate, almost mocking pace, like a predator toying with its prey. Rhea's heart pounded in her chest as she looked over her shoulder. "Silas," she yelled. "We can't just stand here. We need a distraction." Silas's eyes locked onto her, and for a brief moment, Rhea saw the same realization in his gaze. They were running out of options. Out of time. Distracted. "I'll get them moving," Silas said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Jax, follow me. Rhea, hold your ground. We need to keep it at bay." Without another word, the trio split up, each one taking a different route in an attempt to outmaneuver the figure. But it wasn't about evasion anymore. It was about survival. And as the undead closed in from all sides, Rhea realized that the final stand had begun. Rhea's heart was pounding in her chest as she crouched behind a large boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The deafening growls of the undead surrounded her, and the faint clicking of bones echoed from the trees. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, even though she couldn't see them yet. The figure, it was still out there, its unnerving gaze searching the shadows, as though it could sense their every move. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep up the fight. The outpost was still miles away, and the way ahead was blocked by hordes of undead. Worse, the figure was only getting closer, its movements deliberate, its purpose clear. It wasn't just hunting them, it was toying with them. Out of the corner of her eye, Rhea saw Jax and Silas moving through the trees, both of them scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The trio had split up to confuse their enemies, but Rhea wasn't sure if it was working. There were just too many. Too many zombies. Too many questions. "Jax," she whispered into her comm, her voice barely audible. "What's the plan? We need to figure out a way to escape before it's too late." There was a long pause, and then Jax's voice crackled through the static. "We're trying to regroup. Silas is setting up a perimeter to slow them down, but we need to hit the outpost. Now." Rhea bit her lip, her fingers tightening around her rifle. The outpost was their only hope. If they could just get there, they might find some answers. But they couldn't outrun this many zombies. They needed something more. Just as she began to consider her next move, a sudden, chilling laugh echoed from the shadows. It was soft, haunting, and carried with it a sense of complete control. Her blood ran cold. The figure appeared again, stepping out from the darkness as though it had been waiting for her to make the first move. Its eyes gleamed with cold malice as it approached slowly, methodically. Rhea's heart raced. This was it. This was what they had been trying to avoid all along. "You really thought you could escape?" the figure said, its voice low and smooth, almost coaxing. "You think you're in control of this situation. But you're not. This game, it's mine to play." Rhea forced herself to stand, gripping her rifle with both hands. "We're not playing games," she spat. "We're surviving." The figure's lips twisted into an eerie smile. "Survival, such a fleeting thing. You're out of your depth. You're nothing more than prey." With a swift motion, the figure raised one hand, and the ground beneath them began to shift. It was as though the earth itself had come alive, the trees bending and twisting in unnatural directions, the ground cracking as though it were about to swallow them whole. Rhea stumbled backward, her eyes wide in shock. This wasn't just some leader of zombies. This was something more powerful, something unnatural. And then she understood. The figure wasn't just controlling the undead, it was controlling everything. The ground. The air. The very essence of the mountain itself. It had power over the living and the dead, and they had walked right into its trap. The air grew colder, and the trees began to hum, vibrating with an energy that felt almost electrical. There was no escaping this. The figure had them cornered, and there was nowhere left to run. "Do you see now?" the figure asked, its voice almost a whisper, but it resonated in her bones. "You think you're fighting for your lives. But you're not. You're just delaying the inevitable." The zombies, now numbering in the hundreds, shuffled closer, their decayed bodies moving with unnerving precision. The figure didn't need to control them anymore, they were already in sync, their eyes glazed with that same sinister light. It was like the mountain itself was an extension of the figure's will, an unstoppable force that had only one goal, to crush them. Rhea's mind raced. She couldn't let this be the end. They had come too far. But how could they fight something so powerful? "Jax," Rhea whispered urgently into her comm, "we need to get to that outpost. It's our only chance. I don't think we can take it down, whatever it is, it's too strong." There was a beat of silence before Jax's voice came through. "We're almost there. Hold on. We'll find a way." But as Rhea glanced back toward the oncoming wave of zombies, she felt a sinking sensation in her chest. The figure was right. They were delaying the inevitable. The zombies would catch up to them, and the figure would destroy them without a second thought. But there was still one thing they had that the figure didn't, the element of surprise. And maybe, just maybe, if they could reach the outpost in time, they could find a way to use it against their enemies. But the figure wasn't finished. It raised its hand once more, and the ground beneath Rhea's feet rumbled ominously. She looked up, her eyes locked with the figure's. "I don't need to kill you, Rhea," the figure said, its voice colder than ever. "But I will break you." And then, as if on cue, the earth split open again. This time, it was too much. Too fast. A massive, blackened arm shot up from the crack in the ground, followed by another, and another. The ground shook violently, sending Rhea stumbling. These weren't zombies. These were something else, giant, grotesque creatures, their skin pale and cracked, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent energy as the figure. The final battle was about to begin. And Rhea had no idea how she was going to survive it. The massive, grotesque creatures clawed their way out of the ground, their twisted forms emerging from the dark earth like nightmares come to life. Rhea's heart raced as she watched the creatures rise, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly malice. These were no ordinary zombies. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. The air grew colder as the creatures towered over them, their hulking forms blocking out the dim light of the mountain pass. Rhea's breath caught in her throat. Each creature had a face, a twisted mockery of the human form, with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. But the worst part wasn't their appearance. It was the feeling that came with them. The overwhelming sense that they weren't just monsters, they were manifestations of something darker, something beyond understanding. "Fall back!" Jax yelled, his voice breaking through Rhea's thoughts. "We need to get to the outpost, now!" Silas was already firing, his shots ringing out with precision, but the creatures didn't flinch. Their thick, monstrous hides absorbed the bullets like they were nothing more than raindrops. It was hopeless. This wasn't a fight they could win. Rhea's mind raced as she looked around for a way out. The mountain pass was narrow, and the outpost was still too far to reach on foot. The creatures were closing in, their movements slow but deliberate. And behind them, the zombies shuffled closer, their dead eyes fixed on Rhea and her group. The figure stood in the distance, watching them with its cold, calculating gaze. It hadn't moved, but its influence was undeniable. It was everywhere, controlling the chaos, orchestrating the madness. Rhea could feel it, like a pressure building in her chest, suffocating her with its power. "We can't win this," Silas shouted, frustration clear in his voice as he fired another shot into one of the monstrous creatures. It barely registered. "We need to outsmart them." Jax, ever the strategist, was already thinking ahead. "We're not out of options yet. Rhea, you have to keep them occupied. We'll make a run for the outpost. Once we're inside, we can plan our next move." Rhea nodded, though doubt gnawed at her insides. It was their only shot, but it felt like a death sentence. She could hear the growls of the creatures behind her, could see the zombies closing in from the front. The only way forward was through the creatures, and they weren't going to make it easy. With a deep breath, Rhea raised her rifle and fired into the closest creature's chest. The bullet bounced off, but she didn't stop. She fired again, aiming for its eyes, hoping for a weak spot, anything to slow it down. But nothing worked. The creature barely reacted. It was then that Rhea realized, the figure had turned them into pawns, a mere distraction for its own twisted game. They weren't fighting to survive. They were fighting because the figure wanted them to. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ground beneath her shaking again. She glanced around, frantic, but then she heard it, a low, almost imperceptible hum, coming from deep within the mountain. The noise grew louder, more intense, and then the entire pass trembled as though the mountain itself was coming alive. The hum became a roar. A crack appeared in the earth at Rhea's feet, wide enough to swallow a person whole. She leaped back just in time, but then the sky above them darkened. The clouds swirled, twisting into a vortex, and the wind picked up, howling as if in warning. The creatures paused, looking upward, their eyes widening in recognition. "It's not just the mountain," Jax muttered, his voice grim. "It's the entire region." Rhea turned her gaze skyward, her mind reeling as the clouds parted to reveal a massive structure descending from the heavens. It was dark, twisted, and ancient, its silhouette almost too large to comprehend. The structure seemed to be alive, pulsing with an ominous energy that sent a shiver down her spine. "That's it," Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what's controlling them. Whatever it is, it's coming." The mountain itself seemed to tremble as the structure began to settle into place above them, casting an enormous shadow over the battlefield. The figure had summoned something far worse than the creatures or the zombies. It had called something ancient, something powerful beyond their understanding. "It's not just the undead," Rhea said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "It's them." The creatures that had emerged from the ground shifted, as though they were responding to the new arrival. They straightened, their movements synchronized, and for a moment, they seemed to stand in reverence. They were no longer acting on their own accord. The figure, still standing in the distance, raised its hands as the structure continued to descend, a dark portal opening in its center. A terrible energy poured out from the structure, flowing into the creatures and the zombies. It was a force that Rhea couldn't understand, a power that was beyond anything she had ever known. The mountain was no longer just a place. It had become a conduit for something far more ancient, an awakening. "No." Rhea breathed, her hands trembling. "This is no ordinary battle." Jax turned to face her, his expression grim. "We're not fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting for the world." And in that moment, Rhea understood. This wasn't just a fight for their lives, it was a fight for everything. The figure had plans that stretched far beyond the mountain. It wasn't just controlling the undead. It was using them to awaken something far worse. And if they didn't stop it now, the entire world would be consumed by the darkness that was spreading from the mountain. "There's no turning back," Rhea said, her voice steady with resolve. "We have to stop it here." With their path now clear, Rhea, Jax, and Silas knew they had only one option left, to fight with everything they had, even if it meant facing the unimaginable. Rhea's pulse was a drumbeat in her ears as she locked eyes with the massive structure now hovering over the mountain pass. The air was thick with a palpable dread, as if the very sky had been corrupted by the malevolent force that was pouring from the dark portal above. The creatures, the zombies, they were no longer just obstacles. They were part of something much bigger. They were instruments in the figure's grand design, its unholy creation. "This is it," Rhea said quietly, her voice barely audible in the chaos that surrounded them. "We either stop it here, or everything is lost." Jax and Silas stood beside her, their expressions grim. They had no choice but to face the terrifying reality. The creatures and the zombies weren't the only threat now. The figure had awakened something far worse, something ancient, and they had no idea how to fight it. "Do we have any chance?" Silas muttered, glancing up at the towering structure. His voice was a mixture of disbelief and fear. "We don't have the luxury of wondering," Jax replied, determination in his eyes. "We've come this far. We're not turning back." Rhea nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. They didn't have much time. The portal above them pulsed with an energy that seemed to distort reality itself. The wind howled again, growing stronger, and the ground beneath them continued to tremble with the force of something far beyond their control. The creatures that had once been zombies now stood motionless, awaiting their next command. "All right," Rhea said, her voice steady now, "we move in, make it to the structure. We have to stop the figure. That's the source of this power." Jax nodded. "We'll need a diversion. Silas, take the left flank. Draw their attention." Silas gritted his teeth but didn't argue. He knew what was at stake. "Got it. Stay alive." As they sprinted toward the center of the mountain pass, Rhea could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The creatures, huge, menacing, and unyielding, were still unmoved by their presence, but the energy in the air was changing. The figure had sensed their movement, and that was enough to set it into motion. The sky above cracked open with a thunderous roar, and the figure's shadow seemed to stretch across the mountainside, engulfing everything in its path. From the ground, vines of shadow and twisted, rotting roots began to rise, their black tendrils reaching for them like a net closing in. "Run!" Rhea shouted, as the tendrils whipped toward them with alarming speed. Silas was already firing, but the bullets did little to slow the relentless advance of the dark energy. The team scattered, each member weaving through the trees, desperately avoiding the snaking tendrils. The creatures moved now, their dead eyes locked on their targets. The battle had begun in earnest, and there was no room for hesitation. Rhea kept running, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her heart racing. The structure above them pulsed again, a heartbeat of dark energy that sent ripples through the air. She could feel the weight of its power pulling her down, trying to trap her in its influence. But she couldn't stop, not now. Suddenly, a bone-chilling roar filled the air, and one of the creatures lunged at her from the shadows. Rhea barely managed to duck, rolling to the side and drawing her knife in a fluid motion. She slashed at its throat, but the creature's skin was too thick, its strength too overwhelming. It grabbed her arm, pulling her toward its gaping maw, its breath hot and foul. With a roar of defiance, Rhea plunged the knife deep into its eye, twisting it until the creature howled in pain and let go. She scrambled to her feet, adrenaline fueling her next move. She had to get to the structure. It was their only chance. Behind her, Silas was engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight with one of the larger creatures, while Jax continued to lay down fire, covering their retreat. But the enemy was relentless. The figure stood motionless, its hands raised high, its power manifesting in a tangible wave of energy that seemed to warp the very air. The zombies shuffled closer, their eyes glowing with the same sinister light as the figures. "Get to the structure!" Rhea shouted, barely able to hear herself over the chaos. Jax didn't hesitate. He broke into a sprint, heading straight toward the heart of the storm. Rhea followed, her breath ragged as the mountain trembled beneath their feet. The sky above was now blackened, a vast vortex swirling with lightning and shadow. The figure's power was growing stronger by the second. As Rhea closed the distance to the structure, she realized with a start that it wasn't just an ancient artifact. It was a living, breathing entity, its walls covered in strange symbols that pulsed with dark energy. The portal above them was the source, its power feeding into the very ground beneath their feet. "We need to stop it," Rhea shouted, her mind racing. Jax, Silas, can you reach the portal? Jax nodded grimly. I think we can shut it down, but we have to act now. The team closed in on the base of the structure, dodging zombies and creatures as they went. The figure watched from above, its expression unreadable, as if it were waiting for them to make their final move. With a roar of effort, Rhea reached the base of the structure, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure's influence pressed down on her, but she pushed through the darkness, grabbing a nearby control panel that seemed to hum with energy. Ready? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jax and Silas both nodded. Together, they activated the control panel, sending a surge of energy into the structure. There was a moment of perfect stillness, and then a bright, blinding light erupted from the portal above, blinding them all. The zombies and creatures howled in agony as the light grew brighter, more intense. The structure trembled, and the air was filled with the sound of cracking stone and the tearing of reality itself. And then, as quickly as it had begun, everything went silent. The mountain stopped shaking. The creatures froze in place, their bodies crumbling to dust as the dark energy that had animated them dissipated into the air. The figure, too, was gone, its presence vanishing as if it had never been there. Rhea looked around, breathless, as she and her team stood amidst the ruins. The undead were gone. The mountain was silent. It was over. For now. But as Rhea stared at the now calm sky, she knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. The world had changed forever, and so had they. But for the first time in a long while, Rhea allowed herself to believe that there was hope. The fight for survival might be over. But the war against the darkness was just beginning. End of story. I hope this wraps up the story in a satisfying way. Would you like any changes or additional details?